Imagine waking up to find out someone tried to sell the Eiffel Tower. Not once, but twice, and almost got away with it. No bombs, no battles, just pure audacity, charm, and the perfect con. The twist? Both times, the scam targeted some of the richest men in Paris, and the truth didn't come out until it was too late. So, how do you sell a landmark that belongs to an entire nation? Today, you're about to find out. Paris, 1925. The city sparkled with jazz clubs, champagne, and whispers of fortunes made and lost overnight. The Eiffel Tower, once mocked as an iron monstrosity, now stood as the city's proudest landmark. But behind its steel lattice, trouble was brewing. France was broke. The post-World War I economy was fragile, debts were high, and public opinion was turning against the government. Newspapers were filled with stories of crumbling infrastructure and political scandals. And the Eiffel Tower, expensive to maintain, had just been featured in an article complaining about its outrageous upkeep costs. That article didn't just catch the eye of tourists. It caught the attention of Victor Lustig, a man the world would later call the Count, and one of the greatest con artists who ever lived. Lustig was a master of blending in. Born in Austria-Hungary, fluent in multiple languages, and dressed like old money, he could slip into any room, from the gambling salons of Monte Carlo to the offices of European dignitaries, and make people believe he belonged there. He had already run dozens of scams across Europe and America, but what he was about to attempt in Paris would become his masterpiece. The idea came to him over coffee at the Hôtel de Crillon. If the French government was strapped for cash, and the Eiffel Tower was expensive to maintain, why not convince a few wealthy businessmen that it was being quietly sold off for scrap metal? It was absurd, unthinkable, and that's exactly why it could work, because no one would suspect such a bold move. Lustig began his preparations with precision. He forged official government stationery, complete with the seal of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He rented a chauffeured limousine and hired a hotel meeting room with the kind of grandeur that screamed confidential state business. Then he handpicked his targets, 6 of the richest scrap metal dealers in Paris. Each one received a formal invitation to meet with a deputy director general from the ministry for a discreet matter of national importance. When the day came, Lustig was ready. The men arrived one by one, each looking curious and slightly nervous. After all, why was the government calling them in secret? Lustig greeted them warmly, playing the part of a harried official, burdened with an unpleasant task. Over coffee and cigarettes, he explained, the Eiffel Tower's upkeep has become too costly. The government has decided, very discreetly, to sell it for scrap. We cannot allow the public to know until the deal is finalized. To make it believable, Lustig even arranged a private tour of the tower. As the group walked through its iron framework, he pointed out structural weaknesses and exaggerated the cost of repairs. By the end of the tour, the idea of dismantling it for profit didn't seem so far-fetched. Of course, Lustig hinted that competition for the contract would be fierce, and that his influence could ensure the right buyer was chosen. It was a classic setup for a bribe. Among the 6 men, one stood out, André Poisson, a relatively new player in the scrap business, desperate to prove himself among Paris's industrial elite. Poisson saw this as the opportunity of a lifetime. If he won the contract, his name would be cemented in the city's business circles. Over the next few days, Lustig courted Poisson personally, spinning tales of political connections and the importance of keeping the sale out of the newspapers. Finally, Poisson took the bait, handing over a generous bribe and a down payment for the tower itself. Within 24 hours, Lustig vanished. By the time Poisson realized he had been conned, Lustig was already on a train to Vienna, pockets heavy, with cash and a smile on his face. And here's the twist. A year later, Lustig came back to Paris to try the exact same scam again. Most con artists pull a scam once and vanish forever. Victor Lustig? He was not most con artists. After the first Eiffel Tower con in 1925, Lustig laid low in Vienna and later toured Europe, enjoying his winnings. But the thrill of the game, the rush of watching intelligent men fall for an outrageous lie, called to him. And there was one thought he couldn't shake. If it worked once, why wouldn't it work again? By the spring of 1926, Paris was much the same. The jazz still played, the champagne still flowed, and the Eiffel Tower still stood, expensive as ever. Public complaints about its upkeep continued to appear in newspapers. It was as if the city had unknowingly set the stage for Lustig's encore. He returned quietly, checking into a discreet hotel under a false name. The first order of business: recreate the exact conditions of his original scam. He rented the same kind of chauffeured limousine, forged the same official stationery, and booked another lavish meeting room. His fake title, Deputy Director, General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, was dusted off like an old costume. Once again, he handpicked 6 prominent scrap metal dealers and invited them to a confidential meeting about the future of the Eiffel Tower. His acting was flawless, grave, burdened, and just a little reluctant, as though he were revealing a state secret against his better judgment. The plan was identical. First, a meeting to introduce the problem, the tower's high maintenance, costs, and the government's secret decision to sell it for scrap. Then, the private tour of the tower itself, during which Lustig would point out corrosion and structural damage, painting a picture of a decaying landmark that was more liability than asset. But this time, something was different. Among the 6 men was a shrewd dealer named Leon Meyer, who had heard rumors, vague whispers, of a similar confidential sale the year before. The details had been murky, but enough to plant suspicion. Still, Lustig worked his magic. He delivered every line with the authority of a man who had spent decades in the civil service. He spoke of political pressures, public outrage, and the need for discretion above all. And just like before, he dangled the hint that the right consideration might secure the contract. The group left the meeting intrigued and divided. Half believed him completely. The other half, including Meyer, smelled something off. Lustig's prime target this time was a wealthy dealer from Marseille, a man known for aggressive business moves and a hunger for prestige. Lustig knew this man's ego would make him susceptible. He'd want to be the one remembered for owning the Eiffel Tower. Even briefly, the dealer bit hard, meeting privately with Lustig to discuss terms. A bribe was hinted at, then offered. It seemed the second sale was all but sealed. And then Disaster. Meyer had quietly contacted the police, relaying his suspicions. Paris detectives began shadowing Lustig. They didn't yet know exactly what he was up to, but they suspected a swindle. One wrong move, one more meeting, and they'd have him. Lustig sensed the shift almost immediately. His marks grew hesitant. Meetings were postponed. Questions became sharper. And on the 3rd day of negotiations, he spotted 2 men lingering. Outside his hotel, men who didn't look like tourists. The Count didn't wait to confirm. That night, he checked out under his alias, slipped out the back door, and vanished into the Paris night. By morning, he was on a train to the coast, and by the next week, he had boarded a ship to America. The Eiffel Tower remained standing, untouched, but Lustig's legend grew. Not only had he sold the tower once, he had almost sold it twice. His adventures in America? They'd be just as audacious and just as dangerous. When Victor Lustig set foot in New York in the late 1920s, the city was alive with roaring jazz, speakeasies hidden behind unmarked doors, and a skyline racing toward the clouds. It was also a playground for grifters, bootleggers, and conmen, a place where fortunes were made and stolen in equal measure. For Lustig, America offered two things: anonymity and opportunity. He quickly reinvented himself. The Count persona was toned down, replaced with the polished image of an international businessman. He mingled with bankers, gangsters, and wealthy socialites, always staying just mysterious enough to avoid too many questions. But his greatest American scheme wasn't about monuments or scrap metal. It was about money itself. Somewhere between Paris and New York, Lustig had perfected what he called the Romanian box. It looked like an elegant mahogany case with brass fittings, large enough to hold a stack of paper currency. Inside, it supposedly contained a highly complex mechanism that could chemically duplicate any banknote placed inside. The process, Lustig claimed, took about 6 hours to complete a print cycle, after which two identical bills would emerge. In reality, the box was a simple but brilliant prop. Before demonstrating, Lustig would secretly load it with two genuine bills of the same denomination as the one his mark provided. The mark would insert their bill, the machine would process it over the course of hours, and when opened, voila! Two perfect, genuine bills would be inside. It was enough to convince even skeptical minds. After all, both duplicates passed every bank test because they were real bills, just ones Lustig had planted. Once a buyer was convinced, Lustig would sell the box for an astronomical sum, often $10,000 or more, a fortune at the time. He would also include special chemicals and instructions for use. By the time the buyer realized the trick, that the machine could only produce genuine bills, twice before turning out worthless paper, Lustig would be long gone. The Romanian box scam made him rich. It also drew the attention of dangerous people. One of them was Al Capone. Some say Lustig approached Capone not to swindle him directly, but to build his reputation. He borrowed $50,000 from the gangster under the guise of a high-return investment, then returned it weeks later, claiming the deal had fallen through. Capone, impressed by his honesty, rewarded him with a $5,000 good faith bonus. Lustig called it the easiest money he'd ever made, but not all his. American ventures went so smoothly. By the early 1930s, the Great Depression had turned economic desperation into fertile ground for scams, and also sharpened the eyes of law enforcement. The Secret Service began tracking counterfeit currency more aggressively, and rumors of Lustig's operations reached their ears. Agents started piecing together sightings, aliases, and witness statements. Still, Lustig stayed ahead of them. He changed cities constantly. New York one week, Chicago the next, then San Francisco. He traveled light, carrying nothing that could tie him to a crime. Every hotel room was booked under a different name, every meeting staged in a neutral location. But his confidence, and perhaps his arrogance, grew. By 1934, he wasn't just running small cons. He was allegedly tied to large-scale counterfeiting rings, producing tens of thousands of dollars in fake bills. The Romanian box had made him a legend. The Eiffel Tower scam had made him a myth. But the counterfeiting? That would make him wanted. And soon, the man who could talk his way out of any room would find himself locked in one with no way out. By 1934, Victor Lustig was no longer just a clever con man. He was a ghost in the files of the U.S. Secret Service. Agents had a stack of reports describing an elegant, multilingual man with a taste for expensive suits, a magnetic smile, and a knack for disappearing the moment suspicion arose. The problem was, he never left fingerprints, figuratively or literally. No one could quite prove he was behind the scams. Until the counterfeit money started showing up in the wrong places. The bills were good, frighteningly good. Most counterfeiters of the time made mistakes that could be spotted under a magnifying glass. Blurred ink, uneven paper, slightly off-center. seals, but Lustig's operation was producing near-perfect replicas of U.S. currency. Bank tellers accepted them without blinking. Only when the bills began appearing in clusters across multiple states did federal agents realize someone was flooding the economy. And Victor's name was whispered more and more often. The break came when Lustig's lover, Billy May, turned against him. Accounts differ on why. Some say jealousy, others claim fear. What's certain is that Billy May walked into a police station one afternoon and gave detectives the location of one of Lustig's stash houses. Inside, agents found printing, plates, stacks of nearly finished bills, and enough evidence to make arrest warrants stick. The Secret Service put out an all-points bulletin. It didn't take long. Lustig was spotted walking down Fifth Avenue in New York, wearing a tailored suit and carrying a briefcase as if he had nothing to fear. Agents approached. Rather than run, Lustig smiled warmly, as though greeting old friends. "Gentlemen," he said, "you must be mistaken." They weren't at the federal building. They inventoried his briefcase. Inside were $51,000 in counterfeit bills, the same type that had been turning up across the country, even in custody. Lustig's charm didn't fade. He made small talk with his captors, asked about their families, and even offered to teach one agent how to properly fold a pocket square. But while awaiting trial, he managed something even more audacious: an escape. One night, in the Federal Detention Center in New York, Lustig used bedsheets twisted into a rope and climbed out a window. By the time guards noticed, he was gone. For nearly a month, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower vanished again into the streets of America. But this time, the net was tighter. On September 28, 1935, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, agents caught him. For the final time in court, prosecutors laid out his scams: the Romanian box, the Eiffel Tower sale, and the counterfeiting operation that had put him on the government's most wanted list. Witnesses testified to his smooth talk, his quick wit, and the way he made lies sound like truths you'd known your whole life. The jury didn't take long. Lustig was sentenced to 20 years at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. Even there, among murderers and mobsters, the Count kept a certain dignity. He walked the yard in pressed prison denim, spoke politely to guards, and maintained the air of a man who is simply waiting for a train, not serving a sentence, but there would be no last great escape. On March 9, 1947, Victor Lustig died in the prison hospital from pneumonia. On his prison record, under occupation, someone had typed a single, fitting word: apprentice. When the steel lattice of the Eiffel Tower throws its evening glitter across Paris, tourists rarely imagine that, once upon a time, a man in a tailored suit nearly convinced the city's richest scrap dealers that the monument was theirs to cut down and cart away. Yet that is Victor Lustig's strangest inheritance. Not a fortune, not a dynasty, a story so audacious it keeps working long after the con man is gone. Word of the first sale didn't explode in the papers in 1925 because André Poisson, humiliated and fearful of ridicule, kept quiet. That silence was part of Lustig's design. Shame is a lock stronger than iron. By the time whispers did surface, they sounded like urban legend. A count with government seals, a chauffeured car, a grand hotel, and a discreet request for consideration. A year later, the encore nearly worked because the conditions hadn't changed: tight budgets, critical headlines, and a landmark framed as a liability. Different marks, same gears. That more than the forged letterhead or the smooth accent is the real lesson. Con artistry feeds on context. Scarcity, secrecy, and authority create a stage on which even intelligent people suspend disbelief. Lustig layered all three: authority, ministry stationery, official titles, tours of the tower; secrecy, discretion above all, meetings behind closed doors, hints of scandal if leaked; Scarcity. One, maybe two select buyers. Act quickly or lose the deal. Ego did the rest. The scrap dealers weren't fools. They were competitors. Each feared the other might seize a once-in-a-lifetime prize. In that fear, the impossible began to feel practical. Later, in America, Lustig would be remembered for other tricks: the mahogany money box, the counterfeit plates, the polite nod from Al Capone. But the Paris caper remained his masterpiece, because it required almost nothing tangible. He sold a story dressed as an opportunity, backed by props that suggested the state itself was whispering, "Help us quietly and get rich." It is the ancestor of today's slickest frauds emails from the CEO, urgent wire requests, deep-faked voices asking for immediate transfers. New wires, same wiring. There's another thread to his legacy, the folklore of the grifter. After his arrest, agents copied a list later attributed to Lustig rules for winning trust. Variations circulate even now. Be a patient listener, never boast. Read a room faster than you speak. Let the mark talk. Appeal to vanity. Never show need. Whether he actually wrote them hardly matters. The rules endure because they fit the man who could make the Eiffel Tower feel like a line item on a balance sheet. Paris, for its part, kept the tower and learned its own lesson. In the decades that followed, the monument was turned from costly curiosity into a profit center broadcasting antennae, restaurants, a global brand. The very argument Lustig exploited, too expensive to maintain, became unthinkable once the city reframed the structure's value. It's a neat irony. The con that almost dismantled the tower helped cement it as untouchable. As for the Count, Alcatraz wrote the final punctuation mark. Yet even there, the myth swelled. In prison, lore he was courteous, immaculately pressed, the gentleman thief rehearsing his stories on the yard's gray stage. When pneumonia ended the show, the ledger of his life looked like a magic trick in reverse. Nothing up the sleeves, everything in the patter. He left behind no grand treasure, just a blueprint every hustler still studies, and every investigator still teaches. Why does the tale keep its grip? Because it scratches at a universal nerve. If something so public, so beloved, could almost be sold out from under an entire nation, what else might vanish with the right letterhead and a confident smile? It is both cautionary tale and dare. Stand beneath the tower at dusk and squint toward the first platform. You can almost see them. A half circle of men in good coats. A government official with a folder. A city caught between embarrassment and opportunity. Nothing is exchanged. Everything is at stake. And the only thing truly for sale is belief. Is Victor Lustig's legacy the proof that the strongest structures are built of faith as much as metal, and that the boldest thieves don't take what you have? They make you hand it over. Sometimes the most valuable thing a con man steals isn't money, it's certainty. Victor Lustig proved that even the most iconic landmark in the world could be almost taken if the story was convincing enough. If someone offered you the Eiffel Tower today, would you believe them? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's see who would fall for the impossible deal.